Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about my first trimester recap. And the reason I'm talking about this on this channel is not because I don't want this channel to be all about pregnancy or children or whatever, but there are so many things that I would do differently for my next pregnancies that I'm going to have in the future. And so I kind of wanted to talk about how I would better plan for the first trimester, because I had no idea about so many things, and now that I've been through it and I know what to expect, I would do a lot of things differently. So this may help people who are trying to conceive right now, or if you're in your first trimester, maybe some tips to just help you get through it. So anyways, here is my experience, and then I'll talk about what I would do differently in the future. First of all, this was a planned pregnancy, so I was anticipating getting pregnant, and I don't want to say we got pregnant on schedule, but like we were definitely planning on getting pregnant, and so we knew it was coming, or we were hoping it would come, but it was definitely intentional. I think that just helped me to be more aware of like what was going on with my body, to be able to kind of see if I was going to be pregnant or not. When I found out that I was pregnant, I didn't notice anything unusual except that, well, I wouldn't even say that I was late, but I wasn't having any other symptoms. And so when I was getting to my window where I was supposed to start my period, I just kind of started testing for a few days because I was like, I just got my IUD out, and I noticed when I got my IUD that my cycle shortened a little bit. I still had a period every month, which is really, really helpful. So I still knew kind of when I was ovulating, and I tracked that pretty religiously while I was on my IUD. So I had an idea of when, like, every month I would be cycling, but I knew from before I got my IUD in that my period cycle was longer. So when I got my IUD out, I wasn't sure what my timeline was, and I got pregnant on my first cycle off my IUD. So I was really unsure I just didn't know. I was like, okay, like my cycle might be a little longer, so my first day of my period might be a little later than I'm expecting it to be. I think there was a little ambiguity there. That's why I started testing, was because I wasn't getting my period, but I wasn't concerned. And I think I told my husband, I was like, if I haven't got my period by Tuesday, then I'll go to the doctor and get a pregnancy test done there, like the blood one done. And then I tested on a Sunday and found out I was pregnant. So I was like, I could have started my period any day, but I ended up being pregnant. So I was able to see that pretty quickly, and I didn't really feel any different being pregnant. I just felt the same, like nothing had really changed for me. And it wasn't until I was about 5.5 weeks pregnant. I found out when I was 4 weeks pregnant, and then it was like a week and a half after that I started like really developing symptoms. At first I felt fine. I was working out like normal. I was like, oh, like if this is gonna be pregnancy, this is gonna be great. Little did I know what was to come. Once I started exhibiting symptoms, that was definitely challenging, because I had heard about morning sickness, and like, you know, I knew it was something that happens when you're pregnant, but I really didn't know what happens in the first trimester. And I just thought like morning sickness was that you would throw up a lot, and that's all I knew. There were some other things along with morning sickness and first trimester symptoms that was a big shock for me. And I think that was hard for me as a planner, because I felt like very taken aback. I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I would do things differently if I knew I would have prepared a little bit more when I felt good, if I knew I was gonna feel like this for as long as I did. So the symptoms that I had in my first trimester, I was nauseous for sure. I just kind of felt like I could throw up at any time. I just felt like my stomach was constantly turning, and it's just miserable. And that was probably like my biggest symptom. I threw up a couple of times, but very rarely. I always felt sicker in the evening after dinner. So I tried to like take my prenatals in the morning is when I felt better. So I'd take my prenatals in the morning, and then in the evening I'd feel worse. That kind of was a pattern I noticed. And I think that's really important in your first trimester, is to recognize like your patterns of how you're feeling and when, because I think sometimes there's a pattern and then the next week it'll change. So anyways, that was fun. Another symptom that I experienced that really took me back was the food aversions. I knew that there was pregnancy cravings, but I did not know that there was food aversions. I did not understand that at all. All of a sudden, my whole diet seemed to flip overnight. And that was really hard for me to adjust to because I am a planner. I know what I like. I only like my things. And it was like, oh my gosh, all the things I like, I don't want anymore. Couldn't eat any meat. I just thought that, absolutely revolting. So no meat. I also had a hard time with cooking because of my food aversions, and I cook like every night. So to go from always cooking to not feeling like cooking, that was a hard adjustment for me, and I don't think I handled it very well at all. It was really, really rough. Most of my first trimester, I had food aversions. Towards the end of my first trimester, I definitely started to ease up on some of them, and it was like, okay, I can eat poultry now. So I'm gonna eat poultry because protein is really important, and there's so many good nutrients from animal products, and so I wanted those throughout my pregnancy, and so it felt good when I could finally start taking them again, like having those in my diet, and just to feel like I had more options for food. I am not a snacker at all. Like, I eat 2 or 3 meals a day normally when I'm not pregnant. Throughout being sick, eating, you kind of eat little bits at a time, and that helps a lot. And that was really hard for me to adjust to, and I really had a hard time with not eating like set meals. That started to ease up towards the end of my first trimester, and I was really grateful because then I kind of got back onto my normal eating cycle. I'm gonna go back and touch on vomiting because you feel more nauseous when you're either really full or really empty, and so you kind of want to be in this in-between state. And so I found out from my own experience that when I was too full, I would throw up. And so that only happened a couple times, which I'm really, 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 really grateful for. I just am like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine all the women and some of my friends who throw up a ton during their first trimester. I just felt so bad for them. So that was another symptom that I had. The last symptom that I think I really noticed in my first trimester was that my boobs got bigger. And I always thought that would happen like, way later in your pregnancy, but mine very early on, it was very clear that I was growing. And so I noticed that, and just tenderness and things specifically that did start in my first trimester. So what I noticed was a big part of all of these symptoms combined. I just felt like I wasn't able to clean my house or do my laundry. I went from doing things to what is the bare minimum I can do to survive. And I had a really hard time with people being like, let's do stuff. And I was like, I don't want to leave my house. I feel awful all the time. I don't want to leave. So that was kind of hard because we told some people, but we didn't tell. It wasn't public knowledge. I think that can be a hard challenge with being in your first trimester. Feeling icky all the time, that was really hard because I didn't know when it was gonna end, and you don't. That's the terrible part. So they're like, oh, hopefully at the end of your first trimester. But everyone is so different, and so when you're feeling like that, you just never know. And I think that's a really discouraging feeling that comes with your first trimester. I definitely struggled with that a lot, and I noticed that my symptoms started to ease. I wouldn't say they did not go away, but I think around 9 weeks I did feel like a little bit eased, and then 10 weeks felt a little bit eased. So it was very incremental for me moving out of my out of my first trimester into my second, that I started noticing the easing of the symptoms. I did have one of my friends, I told her, I was like, my house is so gross. Can you please come clean my house? So she came over, and that really helped me just to have her clean the things that I was like, this is just disgusting. So, I could clean little bits here and there, but it's really hard to keep on top of cleaning your whole house when you feel sick. So I definitely was so grateful for my friend's help. I felt ick, my house felt like everything feels icky. So that was definitely a helpful thing mentally for me to cope with kind of all the changes I was experiencing. The other thing that was really weird, it just didn't feel real. It just didn't feel like I was really pregnant. I mean, I was like, I feel sick, but that could be anything, you know, that could be anything. I knew I was pregnant, but that is definitely something that was really hard for me to like mentally wrap my head around. And even I think throughout my pregnancy, it becomes more real, but that is definitely a first trimester adjustment, is like, oh my gosh, everything is changing, but it is changing, but it's not at the same time. So it's kind of an interesting beginning of a mindset shift. Now that I've been pregnant once, I do understand food aversions a lot better. I didn't really have any cravings. I'm not gonna say I had any cravings because it wasn't like, oh, I've got to have this. It was more just like, I cannot eat that. That's disgusting. That makes me want to throw up just thinking about it. And then like all the other foods was like in Pride and Prejudice, where she's mimicking Mr. Darcy and she's like, she's tolerable, I suppose. And I'm like, that's how I felt about other food. I was like, it's tolerable. I can eat it and I'll be fine. I think this is generally true for most people. You have morning sickness to protect your, you know, growing little baby. And so your body wants to keep away things that could potentially bring harmful substances to your baby. With meat, you know, meat can go bad really easily. And so your body might be like, I don't want meat. And you're like, ugh, well, that's annoying. That's a huge part of my diet out the window. But it's because your body's trying to protect your growing baby. I think about things that are really like low risk of making you ill, and so it's like things like nuts or like little crackers. Like I think these just bland, very inconspicuous foods, like certain fruits and vegetables, like avocados, I think were fine for me for most of my first trimester. So it's kind of just figuring out, I think ahead of time, knowing that that's what my body's trying to do is protect the new baby. I can think of, okay, well, what kinds of foods wouldn't be a threat in my body's mind? And so those are the kinds of things I would buy ahead of time. So I think the next time we try to get pregnant, you know, I'm going to keep different kinds of nuts on hand or kind of little snacky things. So that way, when I do get pregnant, I already have that stuff available. I think it's just so hard because it's like you go to the store and you're like looking at everything and it makes you sick to be at the store. And so you don't really want to be shopping at the store when you're feeling icky, but you need the food. So I think it'd be a lot easier to have some things on hand. So that's one thing I'm going to do differently for my next pregnancy. Another thing that I will do differently in my next pregnancy is to try more remedies to manage my symptoms. I mean, who likes to throw up? Nobody does. Like, it's a horrible feeling. It's terrible. And for me, I've had some really bad bouts of like the flu or food poisoning as an adult, which has been terrible. And so I do feel very like extra averse to throwing up. So I was very hesitant to try things like, you know, little ginger candies or things because I was afraid it would make me throw up. And that is something that I wish I would have tried a little bit harder at, and I want to do better at in the future, because finding anything that gives you respite from feeling nauseous all the time is so relieving. And it gives you, it's like, okay, maybe this will give me an hour and I need an hour to get something done. That little bit of respite will help you go on and just give you a break. And I think for me, it was so hard to just feel like, am I going to be sick forever? I have no idea how long I'm going to be sick for. I feel sick all the time. And that is really discouraging. And so having something that you can figure out will help to ease things so you can still do other things that you want to do, I think helps mentally. Obviously, it helps physically. I definitely want to be better about trying those kinds of remedies in my next pregnancy. Somewhat going along with that, because I felt so sick, I didn't really work out consistently throughout my first trimester. I did every once in a while, but I just felt gross, and you just don't want to work out when you feel awful. I wish I had. Obviously you're feeling bad, but also some of it's just mental. And I wish I would have been like, you know what? I just need to do a 20-minute workout, or even just simply like, okay, just go and squat. Just do like a set of squats and call it good. I think now later in my pregnancy, I can see that it would have been worth it to try harder to mentally get myself to work out, even though I was feeling sick, because it definitely set me back a lot. I definitely regret that, because I think working out is so helpful for you in your pregnancy. And your body it gets harder. It just gets a lot harder in your pregnancy as your body's changing, and as you're taking on more weight, you get more physically tired quicker. Just like the exertion is really hard. Having your muscles sustained, your muscle quality sustained throughout your first trimester can really help later on throughout your pregnancy, because then it's not like your muscles are weak, it's more just your body is going through these changes. So I really wish I would have been able to recognize that it was worth it to push through and keep trying to work out, not every day, but consistently. I think that would have been a really big benefit for me. And the last thing I wish I would have done, and I will do moving into my next pregnancy, and just kind of in general, I don't know if I've talked about this on my closet video, I don't know. For my body type, if I wear clothes that are oversized, it makes me look bigger than I am. And so I've always kind of stuck to tighter clothes, or like very true to my size clothes. You don't grow a lot during the first trimester, but you do grow a little bit, especially for me when I noticed eating snacks all the time. I did gain like a little bit of weight just because I was eating so much more frequently than I did previously. And I wasn't eating as healthy of stuff too, because it was really whatever, it just sounded good. And that's what we could do. I wish I would have had more clothes that were looser fitting so I could fit into them for longer before switching into maternity clothes, because you really don't need maternity clothes until you're like halfway through your pregnancy. I didn't really start like bumping, like I was getting bigger, but I wasn't really like bumping until 20 plus weeks. So it's, you know, half my pregnancy I could get by with just normal clothes. Your belly is just growing, and so you don't really want anything touching it, especially when you're nauseous. So there was things like that where I felt like my clothing that I had was not conducive for what I was going through. And there was no way to know that the first time around, but I would definitely recommend just getting something one size bigger than you are. And I think that's also great because postpartum, you lose a lot of your bump quickly because your baby is no longer there. But then, you know, you're in this in between where it's like, okay, you can't really wear your maternity clothes, but you also can't really wear your pre-pregnancy clothes. And so you're kind of in this middle, which I think is kind of where it's like the one size up. It seems like that's going to be the sweet spot for a while. And that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, I haven't ever even been postpartum, so I don't know for sure, but I'm speculating at this point that that's what's going to happen. And so I think it's just kind of like, as a woman, and knowing that these periods of bodily change are like, this is my childbearing season of my life, it just means I need to have more clothes and a greater diversity of sizes in order to compensate for those changes. And that's absolutely fine. You know, this is the season, that's what's supposed to happen. So I would definitely do that differently and just maybe have bought a couple more things, especially at the time when I was like, okay, things aren't fitting. I think it would have just helped me to feel more comfortable in my clothes and not have anything touching my tummy really tightly. So that is something I will definitely be taking into consideration my next pregnancy. And now I have pregnancy clothes where I'm like, okay, these can definitely kind of be a little bit more in-betweeny clothes. And so I have more clothes that I'm like, okay, these were great for that, so I'm gonna use them on the next one. So overall, that was my first trimester experience. Those are some of the things I learned, things I would do differently, and hopefully you guys will find this video helpful if this is the season of your life where this is happening. I think for me, it was really helpful as I was going through these things to watch videos on it, because I just didn't wanna feel alone, especially when you're feeling so icky. And it's just nice to know that, like, okay, people get it, or they had the same thing happen to them, or even just knowing, especially as a first-time mom, just being able to kind of see what to expect in the future. That has also been really, really helpful for me in watching like trimester recaps. So I am planning on doing a second trimester recap, and I will be doing a third trimester recap. Similar fashion of like, this was my experience, but then this is what I would do differently, because I think that's really valuable information. And especially as a planner, I like to think about things well in advance. And so for anyone else who's in that same boat or preparing for pregnancy, I think it's just helpful to think about things you can do to prepare for that season of your life. So thanks for watching. If you enjoy content about planning and organization, then go ahead, like and subscribe down below, and I will see you guys in the next video.